Hi, I'm Patrick Michell. I'm a partner at Platform 5 Architects. We're a practice that specialised in domestic architecture over the years. I'll be taking you on a journey through sort of motivations and some of the build and sort of challenges of the project. I think it sort of harks back almost to one of my earliest projects, which was a house renovation for myself in London, where I was able to sort of work closely with a contractor to refurb and extend the house. And I just really enjoyed that process of working more closely with a contractor, being very involved with all decision making and having that sort of uncompromising control so that you can really deliver that sort of architecture vision. And that sort of proved to work very well for us as a practice. This project has sort of gained us lots of traction online media and inquiries, and we're still getting inquiries off it sort of years later. So in terms of the motivation for sort of building a holiday home up in the Norfolk Broads was largely driven by that sort of personal desire to have an alternative space to sort of London life. Saw living in London being sort of how my life would sort of proceed in that time, but also wanted a sort of a more natural environment to bring kids up and sort of moving into that phase of life of having a young family. And then also sort of been thinking about sort of how practice might work as well. I think there's this sort of intersection between sort of business and personal interests of trying to develop an alternative way of using my skills as an architect. So having the traditional architectural practice delivering sort of architectural services, then also sort of having a holiday let experience which can deliver a sort of an architectural holiday experience. So running as a sort of parallel offer to what we do as a practice. So this project had to sort of wash its own face financially. We didn't want a second home just sitting there being empty most of the time. And I've been watching quite closely what Living Architecture have been doing, commissioning these amazing one-off houses, and sort of been in contact with them, and very, very, very helpful, which is very kind of them. But that sort of gave us the confidence to know that we could put together a business plan with ideas of what sort of rental rates you could get and what sort of occupancy levels. So it's this sort of convergence of sort of a desire to create a different experience for family life and also develop a sort of a second sort of business interest, which would be complementary to the main practice. So on site finding, we'd been casually looking, as a lot of people do, sort of property porn, Rightmove, scouring auction sites, and sort of were thinking that we wanted somewhere which was within about 2 hours travel distance of London, just to work both in terms of trying to manage the first project and also having somewhere to escape to on weekends, which wasn't just going to become a chore and heavy on travel. So we'd looked in Kent, Sussex, Suffolk, and then a couple of sites came up in the Norfolk Broads. And we came across this site which had been failing to sell for many years. This was now sort of the depths of the recession. It's 2012. The housing market was very subdued. And this site sort of gradually came down in price to a point where sort of plugging into our business plan, it could work. And having visited the site in Norfolk, it was just incredible. This whole sort of river system where you can sail out onto Broads and onto the rivers and down to the North Sea if you really wanted to. And the wildlife's incredible there, and just immediately you were able to sort of see a lifestyle there which was incredibly attractive, and also plays into sort of a lot of my childhood was spent with going on holiday with our family, and this mirror dinghy my dad had built out of plywood always stuck on the roof, and we'd always go and mess around on boats as kids, and that's something I just really wanted to experience for my own children. So we found a site which is in this sort of secluded private lagoon, and that then connects into the wider Broad system. And there is an existing bungalow on the site. This picture probably makes it look far more attractive and robust than it actually was. It was a sort of 1950s house built out of timber frame on timber piles, and they're all rotten. So it was sinking into the ground, and the sort of living room would be underwater during the winter months. So it was not one that could be renovated, and the planners were quite keen to see a replacement dwelling on that. So we had some pre-app before buying the site, and the planners were very positive on us doing something new and contemporary on the site. So architect as client, in terms of a brief, we wanted it to be a sort of family home where you could sort of meet up with other families and friends, and work as a holiday let. So 3 to 4 bedrooms would be ideal. So you could have 2 families staying there. And then just following ideas we developed as a practice in terms of architectural interiors, connection with landscape, and so on. So the architectural form was sort of heavily influenced by the sort of local vernacular. There's a mixture of sort of both industrial and sort of domestic buildings along the riverfront. So it is a sort of working river environment. So there's the kind of recurring theme is these sort of heavy pitched roofs, and sort of multi sort of bay buildings. So we kind of took that sort of key from that sort of industrial sheddy heritage on the Broads. And we translated that into a sort of 3-bayed house form. So that was split into a living bay, eating, and a sleeping bay. And also we looked at sort of how some of the sort of rather cutesy Edwardian houses along the river took a lot of sort of their cues from sort of colonial architecture at time. A lot of the houses around here were built as holiday homes sort of in the early 20th century as sort of leisure time became more of a thing, and the railways were connecting the Broads to the rest of the country. So this is a section looking through the proposed house, and we sort of designed in a deep overhang on the south elevation to create this sort of veranda space, which has actually proven to be a sort of real key space for the house, which is sort of the rest of the house is then sort of organised around. And for the planners, we produced some fairly sort of soft renderings of how the house might be in this 3 sort of bayed form, with sort of different pitches, different angles and pitch, and different sizes to really work around what actually needs to be accommodated in each wing. So it's sort of pinched towards the front and then opens up towards the back to the big southerly views over the water. And we try to incorporate a sort of deep overhang all the way around to control the solar gain, which is we find on highly insulated houses now. The solar gain is just something that needs to be really carefully thought about. And then to the front of the house is a more sort of modest sort of punched openings, and sort of really trying to integrate the sort of landscaping and stepping up from the ground level, and softening that with planting as well. So this is a site plan of a proposed house, and you can see we sort of split it into 3 bays, and each bay relates to a different part of the view over the lagoon. So the living space on the left has a close relationship to the Carr wetland woodland, and the central bay has a sort of scenographic sort of view with a sort of letterbox type openings out over the water, and that sort of forms the sort of central part of the house where everything else sort of rotates around. And then the bedrooms sort of have different views off into the landscape. So the sort of secondary lateral views through the house, again, sort of get sort of more about these little framed moments, picking out reed beds and just other little bits of the landscape. And also, sort of as you come up and enter the main entrance hall, there's a spiral stair. And from there, then you get the lateral view through 2 rooms out to a sort of distant view down one of the dikes, which connects up with another swamp area down to the west of the house. And then sort of zooming in a bit, we're sort of looking at that sort of idea of architectural interiors and creating atmosphere through architectural interventions. So the dining space is very defined by a bench, and the living space is sort of subdivided by a big sort of steel-clad central unit, again, just to create more variety within the living space. And this whole idea of sort of a broken plan being used to accommodate family life, perhaps children of different ages, and being able to sort of acoustically isolate different areas so you can shut off a bedroom wing and then still carry on making some noise and sort of living in dining spaces. So site constraints, we had to do a flood risk assessment for planning. So we took the simple strategy of basically raising the house ground level above flood levels. And you can see sort of 1 in 100-year flood, we've still got the main decking area just above that. 1 in 1,000-year flood is getting a bit more edgy. And even we had to design for 1 in 1,000-year flood plus 100 years rise in sea level. So hopefully we won't be getting our feet wet anytime soon. But yeah, if the water was this high, most of Norfolk would be underwater. So here's hoping we can reverse climate change. Site constraints, access was another thing we had to consider right from the outset. The access road is on sort of, again, boggy ground, lots of weak railway sleeper bridges. So our main contractor ended up strengthening this bridge just as you turn into the site. So the house was designed, would not get a concrete truck down here, so we tried to eliminate concrete as much as possible. And all the elements had to be transported in a transit van. So we just tried to keep the whole thing as lightweight and simple and fairly traditional, really, in terms of the build to manage this site constraint. And as you can see, the access road in winter can also get quite submerged underwater, which again makes things quite difficult. Site constraints, the ground is also quite poor or very poor. The structural engineer described the ground as reinforced water. So the top 4 meters is peat. And so everything around there you need to just pile down till you get to something more solid. So the engineers came up with a piled solution. So we only had to pile down sort of 8 to 10 meters, which isn't too bad for that sort of area. And then sort of formed a galvanized steel subframe to sit on top of that. And then essentially we've got a timber framed house on top of that, and then that's sort of timber framed, highly insulated with some mechanical ventilation with heat recovery to keep it as low energy as possible. We also had all sorts of things like creating its own water supply, dealing with sewage on site. So it's kind of semi off grid. So by this point, I've been doing the project in my spare time, and my client was raising her eyebrows at having a house built out of wood. So she'd been studying this quite carefully and had been reading The Three Little Pigs, and so asked the pertinent question of, are there wolves in Norfolk, Daddy? So I did some research, apparently there are not, so we dealt with that issue and then moved on to the next site constraint. Construction, we went down the main contractor route. It was too far from home to be able to manage subcontractors at that distance, and I was also running a sort of architectural practice. I'm trying to do this in my spare time, so project managing myself was not really an option. But we really landed on feet with the main contractor. They were brilliant, very proactive, read the drawings, came up with solutions for all the kind of site constraints and all the practicalities of how you build in this really quite tricky site. So the first sort of problem we encountered was once the existing bungalow had been removed, and you've got heavy machinery going up the site, and then it was coming into autumn, the water levels raised and half the site disappeared underwater. So it's trying to set out to tolerance with no real firm reference points on the site was quite challenged, and we did have to repile a number of the piles. So essentially these are steel cased 200mm wide piles driven down sort of 8 to 12 meters depending on local site conditions, and getting them in the right place was a real headache, with the ground being so soft. If they hit a brick as they were going down, they could easily just be knocked off course again. So there was a bit of a process of piling, measuring, and piling again until we got everything in the right place. We also had the problem with the formwork for the pile caps floating off, so they had to be pegged down, and the contractor worked out how to plug the pile caps so that the concrete didn't just drain into the ground as well. So eventually, after about 5 or 6 months, which was excruciating, we managed to get the site to a state where we've got the concrete pile caps in the right place. The site was reasonably stable, and then it could sort of measured up for the steel frame. So the steel frame went in very smoothly within under a week. So that was all prefabbed and then just bolted together on site. At this point now, everyone was very happy. The contractor was happy. We knew what we were building off, and there were reference points, and things started going more smoothly. So the steel frame was then joisted out. This created a sort of working platform for the contractor to then build off and get scaffolding up off. And then the house essentially went up as a sort of traditional timber frame. The guys on site would build the walls and then just lift them into place manually. So again, all just lightweight, simple technologies, and it actually went up very quickly. And as the sort of, I think it's always quite an exciting time when a timber frame is up, where you can actually see all the spaces, and then you gradually get the views out framed through the timber frame. And then we also had to do sort of a fairly engineered timber solution for the sort of double height space in the living room. So we've got sort of steel brackets reinforcing the corner joints there, so that so it acts like a portal frame. And then you can see the project coming together within the sort of context of the sort of lagoon. And always nice to be able to do site visits where part of the inspection is done on a boat. So to completion, I suppose I should have mentioned earlier, we funded this through a sort of mixture of savings and remortgaging our London home, which is sort of being in a most heavily gentrified spot in the country. It allowed us to sort of take some extra equity out. So that was a pretty cheap way of borrowing, and also we were able to do offset mortgages so that you could draw down the amount you needed, so you're only paying on the interest on the amount you've drawn down. So it's similar to a self-build mortgage, but at a much lower rates. So that made it a lot more comfortable whilst we were building. So we've got the spiral stair here, and I think sort of, I suppose one of the benefits of working as architect and client is sort of knowing where to go to get sort of well-priced materials, and having those conversations with a subcontractor. So we sort of had that discussion of how can you keep a spiral stair at a reasonable price, and one of the early bits of feedback was to don't do double curvature on the underside. So we just kept the stair form going up through there, and actually I think it's worked really nicely, and it sort of works with sort of the other patterns in the house. So this stair sort of forms a real focal point on the entrance hall before you move into the main parts of the house. So these are the large sort of barn sliding doors to give that sort of industrial feel to the sort of the three sort of sheddy bays, and these subdivide the space and help with that sort of broken plan idea of being able to acoustically separate the sleeping wing from the kitchen dining spaces. And then this is the lateral view through to the landscape beyond. And then the kitchen dining space forms a real sort of hub of the house. It's got a table there, it can seat 10 quite comfortably. And I think sort of making those moves of actually defining it with architectural elements, with the sort of upholstered bench, and not just doing sort of the obvious thing of perhaps having floor to ceiling glazing and a loose table in there. So I think that's sort of part of what we were trying to do, was creating these moments and atmosphere through the architectural interiors, as well as sort of creating a sort of strong external architectural form. And the dining space leads on to the veranda space, which again has been a real eye-opener in how effective and how good a space this is within the sort of UK climate, being able to use it all year round. It's south-facing, the light bounces off the water, so you can be out there at Christmas Day in a t-shirt, feeling quite comfortable and warm, while still being able to sit outside, or if it tips it down with rain, and you can still sit out there. So it's a really sort of lovely spot to actually enjoy the landscape all year round. So the central bay then leads on to the living space. Again, that sort of is defined by sort of black steel, natural mild steel fireplace. So we've got a wood burning stove in the living room. We've got the wonderful sort of double height space, which feels sort of wonderfully airy. But at night, it can, using the lighting, it still feels intimate and comfortable. That wood burning stove, combined with the mechanical vent system, just spreads the warmth throughout the house. So often, if you put a fire on, you don't need any of the other heating systems to come on. Within the living space, we also created a little nook with a day bed and library space, handy for working from home, or if you need to do a little bit of work on holiday. And again, just to create sort of a variety of spaces for different families, so teenagers don't have to be in the same space as grown-ups. So, and then this is a view in the living room looking back. You get this sort of wonderful close-up view of the Carr woodland, sort of wetland space, and the wildlife there again is absolutely amazing. So moving to the exterior, it was shingle clad to bring some texture in, and again a sort of nice low energy material. And here you can see the sort of the entrance ramp leading up to the raised ground floor. So you can see the sort of height difference, which is about sort of 1.2 meters between the natural ground level and sort of our raised ground floor level. And we've used lots of sort of wetland planting to then just sort of soften that and make it into a sort of a nice terraced an asset to the house, rather than seeing the raised ground floor as a difficult thing in terms of how the house sits within the landscape. And this is the sort of the kind of contrast with the south-facing elevation, which is much more open, much more about the big views onto the landscape. And here, this is sort of on the side elevation, so you can see how the sort of the blackened shingles are sort of wrapped up and over the sides of the house, and the way the plan form is sort of pinched into a sort of wedge means that the roof ridge sort of opens up. So it kind of sits almost like a sort of lily pad on a lily flower on a lily pad, sort of opening up to the big views to the south. And I think the way we sort of used those sort of three gables then means as you rotate around the house, sort of move around the water next to it, they just sort of form this nice sort of landscape thing of moving over each other. So back to sort of the early motivation. These aren't all my children. But it's just been an amazing place to retreat to with family and friends, and it even makes me look like I'm good at fishing, so it's good to impress the kids that way. And then I suppose almost another story in itself is then setting up a holiday let business. So we sort of used some agencies, an early sort of collaboration with the Modern House again was very successful. And using all the publicity we've managed to get for the house just to sort of boost that sort of side of it. But it's been a real pleasure actually sharing the house with people beyond sort of family and friends, and you get some wonderful feedback and insights from the people who visited as well. So and it sort of reinforces what you do as a practice, that people can visit that and then come to you to commission a house, and also clients we have within the architectural practice, we can offer them stays at the holiday let as well, which is quite good just to, if we're talking through certain architectural ideas or systems within the house, then they can actually go and experience it in person, which is far more effective than just being talked about in a meeting. So we found the two sort of strands of the business have really sort of mutually reinforced each other, and I suppose eventually we'd like to be able to do some more. I think from learning from the experience of doing this one, perhaps we would try and do smaller units and then sort of build up as cash flow allowed. The project probably was bigger than we'd anticipated at first, but because of the business model, we were able to sort of borrow more in the end to make the project work. So yeah, here's looking to the future. Hopefully there'll be more mini backwaters around the world. Thank you.